My son expected me to fund his wedding for $52,000. When I declined, When I returned home that afternoon, the first thing that caught my eye was a package resting on my porch. It had no return address, no note, just a pale blue box adorned with a red ribbon, as if it were a gift from a specter. It was 3 days shy of my 68th birthday, and I briefly entertained the thought that maybe Troy had remembered this year. I brought it inside, placing it on the kitchen table beside the grocery bags, but I didn't open it. There were tasks to attend to. The pork shoulder needed marinating, the rolls required rising. I had meticulously planned the menu down to the last olive in the potato salad, even splurging on fancy paper napkins with golden leaves in the corners, the kind people toss away, but I bought them anyway to make the table feel cared for. Troy hadn't been home in nearly 9 months. He texted on holidays and called when he needed a tax form from his time living here 5 years ago. I still kept his old room just as he left it, the same bookshelf, the same baseball glove tucked away in the top drawer. Evelyn from down the street was helping with the chairs and tablecloths. She asked if Troy was bringing anyone, and I told her yes, his fiancé, Shiloh. I said her name carefully, as if it might shatter in my mouth. Evelyn nodded, her expression uncertain, as if she couldn't decide whether to be supportive or to hold back concern. I had spent an entire week preparing the house, cleaning the windows, polishing the silver, pulling weeds from the garden to make the front welcoming. I even placed a bottle of red wine in Troy's room, just in case he wanted to feel at home. Yet, in the back of my mind, a small voice whispered, the one that surfaces when you've forgiven someone too many times, don't get your hopes up. But I did. I always did. The day before the party, I received a call from Troy. His voice was hurried and flat. "We'll be there tomorrow, Mom. By the way, we want to share something big with you. Got some plans to discuss." That was all he said, plans, not birthday wishes, not inquiries about my well-being, not even a hint of excitement, just plans. I smiled at the phone like a fool and told him I couldn't wait. If you've ever thrown a party, hoping someone would show up and look you in the eyes like they used to, perhaps you understand. On the morning of my birthday, the sky turned gray, as if it had forgotten how to shine. By 9 a.m., I had finished setting the last of the chairs, the roast was in the oven, and the apple cobbler cooled on the windowsill. The house smelled warm and nostalgic. I even wore my deep blue cardigan, the one Troy once said made me look like someone from a family photo. By noon, a few neighbors arrived with cards and hugs. Evelyn helped pour lemonade and distribute plates. Everyone gathered in the backyard under the string lights I had hung the night before. As I was refilling the sweet tea, I spotted Troy walking through the side gate, Shiloh on his arm. She wore white, a long, flowing dress with silver trim, not a sundress, not casual. She moved with an air of ownership, as if the place belonged to her. Troy gave me a side hug, wished me a happy birthday, and stepped away before I could respond. He didn't compliment the food or ask how I had been sleeping, he merely looked around, nodding as if he were surveying a venue. They moved to the center of the yard, and I thought perhaps they had brought a gift or something sweet to say. Troy tapped his glass with a fork, and the crowd hushed, some clapping. I sat down near the table, unsure of what was about to unfold. He cleared his throat and announced that he and Shiloh had been dreaming of their wedding for months. They had found the perfect venue near Lake Dillon, a rustic barn with a mountain view, everything elegant yet simple. He used that word repeatedly, simple. Then he smiled and said they were excited to share this journey with family, that this wedding would reflect love and legacy. He turned to me and said they hoped I would support them in a meaningful way. It took a moment for the reality to sink in. He mentioned that the venue deposit was time-sensitive, that catering required half up front, and that the total was around $52,000. He smiled again, pausing for applause that never came, then added that he and Shiloh felt it fitting for the woman who taught him to believe in dreams to help fund this one. The yard fell silent. I nodded, smiled, and said I would think about it. I didn't express my shock, didn't mention that it was my birthday, didn't say I had only $600 in my checking account and a car in need of repair. I simply picked up a paper plate and walked inside to refill the deviled eggs. 2 days after the party, the house felt like a stage left in haste, napkins still folded in a basket, a half-eaten cake under foil, a vase of tulips drooping from their own weight. I moved through the quiet, careful not to disturb anything. Troy stopped by that afternoon with a plastic folder and a paper cup of coffee. He said he only had a few minutes, that Shiloh was waiting in the car. He sat at the table as if it were just another Wednesday, slid the folder toward me, and tapped the top. He said these were tax documents needing my signature because I still owned the house, and it made things easier for his filing. I asked what had changed. He said he was filing jointly now, that Shiloh needed some information processed before their loan applications could proceed, standard stuff. I looked at the papers, filled with numbers and small print, and saw he had marked where I needed to sign with sticky notes. My chest tightened, but I remained silent. Troy picked at the corner of the folder, glancing at the oven clock, mentioning he needed to beat traffic on Highway 285. I took the pen, my hands didn't shake, but my stomach churned. I signed where he indicated and handed the folder back. Troy gave me a quick hug and was out the door before I reached the sink. I stood there for a long time, listening to the sound of their car pulling away, wondering why everything felt like a transaction, as if kindness was being itemized, as if motherhood was a service you closed out with a tip line. That night, Shiloh called, saying she wanted to come by and help me declutter the office. She mentioned she had a gift card for a donation pickup service. Her voice was overly cheerful, almost rehearsed. She arrived alone, bringing oat muffins and herbal tea, complimenting my kitchen towels, and asking how I felt about letting go of old things. She said starting fresh felt powerful. As she scanned the bookshelves while she spoke, she boxed up a few old binders, a lamp, and some trinkets from Troy's high school days. When she found the deed folder in the file drawer, she picked it up, running her fingers along the edge as if it were something fragile. She said nothing, just nodded and placed it quietly into the box marked, shred or scan. I didn't stop her, I merely stood there, watching her hands move as if she had done this before. Later that night, I looked at the kitchen counter. The yellow tabs were gone, the coffee cup was gone, the folder was gone. Only the feeling remained, a kind of silence I couldn't name, as if something significant had been touched in a way that could not be undone. It happened on a Thursday night. The air was brittle with cold, the kind that sneaks through windows and makes floorboards creak as if trying to warn you. I had just finished my shift at the library, a few hours of volunteer work that gave me something to dress up for. I carried a brown paper bag with soup from the diner, the weight heavy on one side because of the cornbread. When I reached the porch, something felt amiss. The porch light was dimmer, and a wind chime I had never bought hung by the door. Then I saw it, a new keypad lock where my brass knob used to be. I pressed my palm against the door, knocked once, then twice. I heard footsteps, and Troy opened it. He looked rested, cleaner than usual. He didn't step aside, just stood there with one hand on the frame and the other on his hip. Behind him, I saw Shiloh sitting on the couch, flipping through a home decor catalog. Troy said the house was now under new paperwork, that things had shifted, and he needed time and space. He hoped I understood. He didn't use the word eviction, didn't raise his voice, just spoke calmly, almost politely, like someone addressing a stranger in a waiting room. I told him I needed to come in and get my things, my coat, my nightgown, my photo albums. He said most of it was already boxed up, waiting on the porch. I turned to see 2 cardboard boxes, unevenly taped, sitting by the railing. He said they couldn't let me stay because it complicated things with their financial process, that it was better this way, cleaner. Shiloh never looked up from her magazine. I didn't argue, didn't cry. I picked up the boxes, stacked them on one arm, and carried the soup in the other, walking down the steps without looking back. By the time I reached the end of the block, my wrist ached. I stopped under a street lamp. One of the boxes began to sag from the bottom. I sat on the curb and opened it. Inside were some sweaters, 2 pairs of socks, and a plastic grocery bag holding my toothbrush and a jar of face cream. I didn't call anyone, didn't scroll through my phone for a ride. I just sat there, the cold biting through my coat, trying to comprehend what had just happened. It wasn't rage I felt, nor betrayal, it was something quieter, a slow unraveling, as if a thread had been pulled from my center, and the rest would take its time to fall apart. I stood up and walked toward the bus stop, bags in hand. Somewhere behind me, my porch light flickered off. The bench was cold, but I sat there for hours. Every time a bus passed, I let it go. My fingers were numb from the wind and from holding the boxes, but I remained. I wasn't waiting for a ride, I was waiting for the panic to settle into something manageable. By the time the streetlights glowed orange, I realized I had nowhere to go, not really, not in a way that made sense. I didn't want to call anyone, I didn't want my voice to crack while explaining something I didn't fully understand yet. It was nearly 10 when I saw a familiar figure walking across the lot behind the bus shelter, Evelyn. Same coat she had worn for years, same cautious steps. She was holding a takeout container, balancing it like a tray. I had forgotten she lived near that part of town after moving into a retirement duplex. She didn't ask questions, just looked at me for a moment before turning and saying she was walking home and I could join her if I wanted. I followed her without a word. She held the door open with her hip and placed the container on her kitchen counter, chicken and dumplings, still warm. The next morning, she laid out a cot in her sewing room, saying I could stay a few days. I folded the blankets neatly, lined my shoes under the window, and placed the boxes by the wall. I didn't unpack. We didn't talk much, just enough to know when coffee was ready or what channel the weather came on. It felt quiet in a way that allowed my thoughts to settle. On the third evening, I sat with my paperwork, the few things I had taken when I left, insurance letters, bank statements, and the small folder with copies of the house title. My name was still there on the printout from last spring, my signature clear and dated. Something tugged at me, not anger, just a weight behind my eyes that wouldn't fade. I took the pages to the kitchen table. The light above flickered slightly, as if reminding me not to overlook any detail. I recalled Troy saying the forms he gave me were for tax purposes, that I needed to sign for filing. But the more I examined them, the less they made sense. The form numbers didn't match any IRS documents I recognized, some sections were blank, and one had a signature block labeled, Transfer of Deed. I stared at that line for a long time. I got up, found the magnifying glass Evelyn used for her crossword puzzles, and held it over the signature line. My name was there, but something looked off, like it had been printed, not signed, or perhaps copied. That was the moment everything shifted. Not because I had proof, but because I had doubt strong enough to take shape. For the first time, the fog surrounding what had happened began to lift. Something wasn't right, and I was finally ready to stop pretending it was. The next morning, I pulled the folder out again, spreading the pages across Evelyn's dining table while the kettle hissed in the background. I wasn't looking for drama, I was seeking clarity. The signature line still didn't sit right. It had my name, but it lacked something, pressure marks, ink flow, human irregularity. There was no curve, no hesitation, no pause before the loop in my R. It looked correct at first glance, but now, in daylight, it appeared too perfect. I asked Evelyn if she still had that old file of employment records we used to update together. She nodded and fetched a binder from her closet. We flipped through subfolders until we found a form I had signed 2 years ago, same pen, same paper stock. That signature had a softness, a tilt, the one on the documents had none. We said nothing, just kept flipping, comparing, watching as the differences became louder without a single word spoken. That afternoon, Evelyn made a call to someone she knew, Walter Graham, a retired attorney who now assists seniors with estate reviews and fraud prevention. She said he wasn't flashy, didn't seek headlines, but he noticed things most people overlooked. He came the next day, a quiet man dressed in a wool scarf, his hands moving slowly yet precisely. He didn't make promises, he simply asked me to walk him through everything from the moment Troy brought the folder. We sat at the kitchen table for 2 hours. He asked me to describe the sequence of events, when I signed, what I understood at the time, and how the documents were introduced. He listened without interruption, occasionally jotting notes in a small notepad with green lines. When I finished, he nodded and turned to Evelyn, saying it was enough to begin a review. He took the documents with him, promising to return in a week. No speculation, no alarm, just process. That night, I sat on the cot, wrapped in a blanket, as the heater clicked on and off, filling the room with soft hums. I didn't feel angry, not even afraid. I felt something more solid, like a door inside me had closed, and another had quietly opened behind it. I made a cup of chamomile tea and sat by the window, seeing my reflection in the glass. The lines near my mouth were deeper than I remembered, but there was also a stillness in my eyes I hadn't seen in years. It wasn't just about the house anymore, it was about the ground beneath me, the way I had allowed people to speak over me, smooth things over, call things complicated when they were simply dishonest. For the first time in a long time, I wanted the truth, not to win anything, not to punish, just to be able to look at myself and know I didn't let this part of my life disappear without a voice. Exactly 6 days later, Walter returned, wearing the same wool scarf, his presence as quiet as before. He carried a folder that looked thicker than the one I had given him. He didn't sit right away, just stood by the chair and asked if we could talk privately. Evelyn gave me a small nod and stepped out to her garden. Walter opened the folder slowly. Inside were several documents I had never seen before. He had requested access to the county registrar's records and pulled every deed transfer, mortgage release, and notarized file connected to my property for the last 18 months. One of the transfers bore a stamp from a mobile notary, but the timestamp didn't match the day Troy visited. It was dated 3 weeks earlier, the same day Shiloh brought me those muffins and boxed up the office closet. Walter showed me a copy of the signature comparison report, a document his colleague, a handwriting specialist, had helped analyze. My name had been traced using digital lifting, then reprinted and pressed onto the form. It bore all the technical signs of forgery: clean lines, even pressure, no pen flow. He slid over a printout from my joint account, showing 2 large transfers labeled staging expense and pre-wedding advance. Both withdrawals occurred within a day of the forged signature filing, totaling just under $24,000. Walter said nothing more, he simply looked at me with the kind of silence people use when they know what comes next will change everything. I didn't cry, didn't speak, I only nodded once and placed my hand on the folder. The paper felt warm from the sun streaming through the window. That night, I wrote a letter, just a brief one, no blame, no apologies, simply a statement. I said I had initiated legal steps to reverse the property transaction, that I had documentation and representation, and that any further communication from Troy or Shiloh should go through Walter. I placed the letter in an envelope and dropped it in the mailbox down the street. It had no greeting, just a name and an address, my son. Evelyn came in later with a pot of soup. She didn't ask questions, she just sat beside me and mentioned her hydrangeas weren't thriving this season. After she went to bed, I stepped outside. The wind had picked up, clouds sliding across the sky in slow, determined shapes. I stood on the porch, breathing in the chill, not like someone bracing for a storm, but like someone who had already weathered one. I looked out at the yard and knew I wasn't retreating, I was positioning myself, not for revenge, not for anger, but for something steadier, a correction, a quiet realignment of what had gone off course. For the first time since that night on the bench, I felt rooted again, not to a place, but to myself. The following week passed like slow water. Walter was preparing paperwork, and Evelyn kept baking, as if the oven was her way of holding things steady. I spent my mornings in her garden, trimming stems, cleaning up brittle leaves, letting my hands move without needing answers. One afternoon, I sat on the edge of her porch with a lukewarm mug of coffee, scrolling through a local community board Evelyn had shown me. That was when I saw it. Shiloh had posted a photo, a wide angle.